Hello, and thanks for joining today's webinar. This is Scott Dill with the Real Story Group and our CEO and founder, Tony Byrne. You can see us with us as well. He's going to be taking us through the heart of today's presentation. But as we get started, I just wanted to touch base on a couple quick housekeeping items of note and welcome you all to today's presentation. I do see a number of first-time attendees on the line, so welcome. Thanks for joining us today. For those that are new or folks that have been here to a number of our presentations, you'll know that we certainly appreciate hearing questions and feedback. So if you do have any of that, please enter that into the questions tab and go to webinar control panel, and we'll get to as many of you at the end of today's session as we can. And if for some reason we don't get to you, we'll be sure to reach out after today's session. The other thing is you will be able to view a recording of this session. So that'll be available in the next couple of days. And then the slides will also be sent to you via email from our marketing team. So keep an eye out for that. And again, certainly encourage you to ask questions as we're going along through today's session. I do want to talk a little bit about Real Story Group for those, especially that are new, but again, a good refresher from from those that have been here a few times. We are an industry analyst firm, and this is the area we cover. It's the Omnichannel or MarTech stack. So where we differ from other analyst firms is really twofold. One, in terms of our coverage areas, which is shown on this map here. And the other is the fact that we never work for or advise any of the vendors that you see on this map. So our entire focus is on advising technology users and buyers and helping you to make the right decisions when it comes to your omnichannel or MarTech stack. And there are a number of ways that you can engage with us, and so we'll talk about that at the end of today's session. But for now, let me turn things over to Tony, who will get deeper into why now is a time to rethink your MarTech stack for a new era. Tony?
Yeah, Scott, really excited about this topic. You can see from this kind of vendor map that we put together, it's a certain kind of cartography about where vendors fit with each other and in the world, but it doesn't necessarily give you guidance around where, where they should fit in your stack. And that's been an increasingly urgent question among our subscribers over the past 5 years. Historically, we've been providing and still provide really hard-hitting vendor evaluation research, but now our subscribers increasingly are asking us, bigger questions around how do the pieces fit together, what services should render where, what should I keep an eye out for. So the next 25 minutes or so are going to be kind of our latest thinking about what's new and different now we begin to potentially emerge from the pandemic era. So we're going to look briefly backwards because I think it suggests a trajectory about where we're going, but then we'll spend most of our time talking about what's going on today and what the future looks like. So, we founded Real Story Group 20 years ago, originally as CMS Watch, and this was our first stack reference model. It was kind of a stack of content going in and out to manage your various digital properties, but particularly your website, which was really for most organizations kind of the center of the be all and end all in the 2000s. And many of you who were active during that decade professionally, spent a lot of time and energy kind of building out, maybe in some cases, your first WCM platforms and really populating that and then kind of waiting for the crowd to show up. And hopefully it did. It didn't always. And so that then kind of brought to fore the whole era of digital marketing and a true MarTech stack in the 2010s. And so for the 2010s, this was the reference model that we shared with our subscribers, where you had these major channels on top and then a variety of production, interaction, delivery services underneath it. You might be going through communities, through e-commerce portals, so forth. But then the rise of these various content and engagement management platforms, where WCM here in green is just one piece of the puzzle, also increasingly focusing on marketing automation, email management, obviously social engagement, and increasingly separate digital asset and media asset management capabilities to help fuel all of this. hopefully built on some sense of customer data, although I think many organizations built their content and engagement management capabilities. Unfortunately, many of us didn't really pay as much attention, particularly earlier in the decade, as we should have to customer data. And now, of course, that's coming back to really, strike us strongly today. One of the things that happened here over the 2010s, though, was we spent a lot of time really kind of modernizing and beefing up these environments. And so that was good because we got better at doing things like, doing drip campaigns in Marketo or some other marketing automation platform. But it was bad because we ended up kind of creating these very sophisticated silos that unfortunately were disconnected from each other. And so now, particularly during a pandemic, when we're wanting to create a more customer-centric, coherent journey, this is what we're left with. Someone may like our ad here, which was developed in its own silo with its own content, rules, planning, and analytics, but then go to our website, have a disconnected experience. We do sign them up for email, that's good, but then they log in through mobile, it doesn't work well. They reconnect with us on social, love it, request some print, it's completely not aligned, so on and so forth. And this is a very common experience where we have these engagement silos, in some cases, very sophisticated capabilities, but they incorporate, in a sense, almost a kind of mini stack of services. And so what we see a lot of you doing today is trying to connect all these pieces laterally. It's a many-to-many nightmare. And it's just not working very well. And it's become, that's why, MarTech people consistently say from survey to survey, my biggest problem is integration. A lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is having to do this kind of lateral integration, and it's causing really big headaches. I think the other thing that this doesn't address, that we are speaking to a lot of our subscribers a lot recently, particularly those in financial services, CPG, but also other segments, is this whole world where they have to deal with both B2B as well as B2C, and in some cases B2C, B2B2C, or B2C to B, especially with people working at home. These lines are getting very blurry. There's new business models forming, and rather than like duplicating your stack, how do I deal with the fact that I may have B2B journeys, B2C journeys, blended journeys? This is a conversation, I would say, that comes up in 60% of the advisory calls that we have with MarTech leaders like you. And so this kind of model of the 2010s just isn't working for that world. So we've come up with a target reference model for the 2020s, for more integrated customer experiences. And I'm going to introduce this. Some of you have seen this before, but then really talk more about what are the implications of this model for your new stack. So the key innovation that happens here is that you separate out or abstract out core foundation services around operations, unified customer data, journey orchestration, personalization, omnichannel content, certainly customer intelligence. And you extract those capabilities from individual silos so that they can be leveraged across a customer journey. And you can have a more coherent customer experience. And for that matter, a more scalable MarTech stack where you can add new silos, new products as you need, because you have this foundational base of data, content, and decisions to build off of, right? So this is really not just a useful future, but we think a highly necessary future. The way that this works out from a platform perspective then is this reference architecture model, where again, you still have these engagement channels, but there's more every year. You have interaction delivery environments like applications, e-commerce, certainly advertising. Then these content and engagement management platforms, that's this first colored area here, still really important, but going to play a really new role in your new stack. And then these enterprise foundation platforms, some of which you are just now licensing or considering licensing. Intelligence hubs, hopefully you already have some sophisticated capabilities there, but some of these other pieces may be just coming online in your environment. And we would argue that these are not necessarily appendages, but in fact, they're actually foundational in your new stack. And so there's a number of implications then that fall out of that. I'm going to talk about three of them in particular, but wanted to remind you what Scott led off with, which is that if you have any questions at all, or just a comment you'd like to add, or an anecdote, or something you disagree with, feel free to use the questions tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. Go ahead and fire away with anything you want. We'll definitely have time to get back to you towards the end of the half hour. But now let's drill into what are the 3 implications of this new stack structure. So the first thing is what we call Pilates for your stack. And so this is this whole process of moving capabilities from individual silos to enterprise-wide availability. And so what happens here is that your content and engagement management platforms become more sort of order takers, and your enterprise foundation platforms become more decision makers. So the brains but even in many ways the muscles are sort of going from your pecs up here into your core, right? And so you're really building your core capabilities. Now, it is important to be able to be highly contextual in the way that you engage in different channels. So you may engage differently in Twitter than you do in Facebook. You're going to engage differently in email than you will on your website, than you will maybe in an in-app experience. That's good, right? You want your experiences to be contextualized. And that will always be the case in your channel-specific environment where you're doing contextualization, assembly of experiences, delivery of experiences, handling interaction. But then at an enterprise-wide or journey-wide perspective, you've got core data, core content, insights, orchestration, personalization, operational collaboration, these services happening outside the context of a particular vendor platform, outside the context of a particular channel, right? And so that's the other thing about this stack is it's not what a vendor tells you it is, it's what you build, right? So your stack is really your responsibility. And in a way, it is your ticket to freedom, we think, in this decade. But one of the more interesting things that this means is that you can get lighter at the engagement tier. By lighter, I also mean potentially spend less money than you are today, where many of us, I believe, are actually overspending at this tier. So one good example is with email and marketing automation. To the extent that you build up your campaign journey and data management capabilities at a more enterprise level, you don't necessarily need those capabilities in an ESP or a map anymore. You might be able to convert to simpler, cheaper, CDP-friendly capabilities, maybe with programmatic senders like SendGrid, for example. So we've been coaching several of our subscribers through this journey. Very interesting. On the digital asset management side, it's also possible that you, in the future, you may need something simpler than like a full-blown DAM, maybe a lighter brand management system, because you're going to be managing some of your components, some of your core assets, potentially lowering your stack. I'll talk about that in a second. But there's a related story with web content management where many of you right now are overpaying with these behemoth systems that honestly, in many cases, are just slowing you down. We think that the future here resides in probably simpler hybrid architectures. By that, I mean hybrid headless architectures that push components management also potentially lower in the stack. We're on the lookout for omnichannel content platforms. It's an emerging space in the market. You'll see other webinars about that. So that's maybe an additional area to be thinking about from a content perspective. The other big player here, often the bull in the china shop, are these Salesforce automation and CRM platforms. And one of the interesting things is once you get your data house in order, you can start thinking of CRM less as a kind of behemoth, repository of your data and your objects and all the relationships, and more just a service. It's something that you do. And this is very interesting. Salesforce is, of course, pushing back very hard against this model. But in the future, hopefully from a services perspective, you can get a lot lighter here. A lot of the calls recently with our subscribers have led in one direction or another, ultimately comes back to Salesforce, the problems that they're having with the platform, the problem that they're having with the company itself. And so a lot of the conversations we've been having recently have been around potentially, in some cases, ring fencing your Salesforce investment, being very careful about what you license from them, and in some cases, shifting your investment with them in other directions. So a lot to talk about there, but it relates to the second trend for your new stack, which is really fit for purpose flexibility. And I think that this was always the case, that marketers need tools that really work for them. But it's really gotten accelerated during the pandemic, where they have to be much more flexible. They really need fit for purpose tools. If I have to drill a small hole in a piece of wood every morning at 9 a.m., the answer is not to pull out some massive drill press that you happen to have lying around. Marketers really need the right fitting tools. And so that means not just defaulting to vendors because you happen to know them. So I'll give you a good example, just because they acquired a couple of firms today, is Sitecore. So Sitecore purports to do a lot of different things across your entire stack. And I would argue that in many cases, they're a mismatch, because they're way overkill for certain things and then very underbaked for certain other things. Not unusual when you see a suite vendor like this. And what you lose here, what you gain here from working with a single vendor, you lose here in terms of a lot of flexibility. Sitecore just acquired a combination CDP and personalization platform, as well as another e-commerce platform today. And so those are going to be cloud native alternatives to some of the traditional single tenant capabilities that they have. So it's a somewhat messy environment, but to some extent, no less messy than a lot of other major MarTech vendors who have a lot of overlapping capabilities. So you need to be very, very careful here and not license a vendor stack. Instead, own your own stack. And I was picking on Sitecore there, but it's a similar story with Adobe, which has tried to smush together a lot of very disconnected tooling. Their CDP in particular has a very narrow scope for what you would apply to it. Similar story with Acquia as well. So not trying to pick on Sitecore alone there. Notice that my connection was dropped there and I've gotten reestablished. So I'm back here. Hopefully you can see everything. So the third trend here is the bigger picture. And we've been exploring this a lot in Real Story Group's private Stack Leadership Council. So we have a council of MarTech leaders from major corporations around the world. We meet every couple months. Before the pandemic, we met in person. We'll be meeting in person again. More recently, they've been virtual meetings where we share a lot of what's working among our different companies. It's obviously very private and confidential. I can't go into these discussions, but a lot of the discussions that we've had there, or that RSG that we've been having separately with some of these large firms, revolve around a number of other changes that relate to these stack changes. So to date, I've been talking about changes in your stack, particularly this notion of Pilates and what that means in terms of kind of disconnecting and decoupling, including decoupling from major vendors in certain cases. But there's other model changes that are related to this. And I think one is really being able to set yourself up for long-term adaptation. And for that, you really need a real stack architecture and a stack plan and a stack roadmap. And that's been some of the most interesting work that we've done with some of our subscribers, is really help them through some of those roadmaps. The other thing that successful companies are focusing on is real service definition here. So really being clear about what capabilities reside where. Sometimes there's going to be a little overlap. Sometimes that overlap is creative. Sometimes it's not. But really understanding this less from a vendor perspective and more from a service definition. We're also seeing a lot of new operational models around this. Obviously, different sorts of capabilities that you need to manage some of these enterprise foundation services. Certainly, CDP brings to fore the need for marketing ops, but also data ops. And then supplier transformation. This has been very interesting as well. We've been helping a lot of our subscribers kind of rethink some of their relationships with some of their major vendor partners, making sure that they get the most out of their spend as opposed to just essentially shoveling more resources and getting declining returns from it. Also, very different orientation that we're seeing towards systems integrators, which is an interesting kind of trend in the market. And I think rethinking some of those relationships as well in terms of the kinds of expertise that I need. And is my partner really set up for where I'm going in the 2020s? Or are they still selling me a vision for the 2010s? So here's some final lessons, and then we'll get to your questions. There's 5 key takeaways here. So you really want to transition your investments going forward, lower in your stack to these foundational services. Lower in your stack doesn't necessarily mean disconnected from the customer. If anything, they can make you more powerful and more flexible and more adaptive in the way that you interact with prospects and customers. But what it does mean is that these are capabilities that you can use because they're lower in your stack across all of your different channels, across all of your different business lines. And that's really the future. What this also then gives you the freedom to do is number 2 here, which is get more agility and flexibility in your customer-facing environments with potentially lighter tooling. So lighter alternatives to some of the heavyweight email, web, and certainly CRM investments that you have now. This is not going to happen overnight, but we've been coaching some enterprises through this over the next 2 or 3 years. Their stacks may look very different. And then focus on right fit instead of vendor consolidation. Hopefully the pandemic has taught us that, that the goal here is not to see how few vendors we can have in our MarTech stack, but do we have the right vendors in our MarTech stack, and how are they going to work together within our enterprise architecture? So to the extent that you do need to rationalize, you want to rationalize based on services rather than vendors. In other words, if we have 5 different email services, why do we? Maybe we need 2. Maybe we need one for transactional and another one for our marketing needs. Perhaps so. But you want to rationalize based on services rather than just rationalize to a single vendor for its own sake, because again, that gets you away from best fit. And then you want to rethink some of the corollary considerations. So we've been talking, of course, a lot about the tech stack today, but you really want to also think through what are the operational implications of this sort of Pilates type approach that we're recommending here in terms of the capabilities and the skill sets that you need that are not necessarily vendor specific, that are not necessarily channel specific. Obviously, there's a lot of governance implications here as well. A lot of really good conversations happening around this in our council, hopefully happening in your organization as well. So if you'd like to work with us to improve your stack decision making, there's 3 ways that you can do that. One is you can get access from a self-service capability to any of our research by licensing a stream, and then you get full access to all of our hard-hitting vendor evaluations and our decision support tools and us by phone. The second opportunity here is to license all of our research and then get advice about how to build and sustain a proper stack roadmap. And then a select group of those can apply to join thirdly here in our Omnichannel Stack Council, which is only open to enterprise MarTech leaders. So if you're interested in any of those, feel free to reach out to us at these coordinates here. While some questions are coming in, I invite you to put more in. Scott, I'll let you just wrap up here on logistics, and then we'll get to everyone's questions.
Great, thanks, Tony. And yes, I do see some questions popping in, so we'll certainly get to those here momentarily. Certainly encourage all of you on the line to take a look at excerpts from the research as you get an idea of our writing style. Certainly, Tony and the rest of our analysts take a pull no punches approach in detailing what the vendors do well, but sometimes maybe more importantly, what they don't do so well, where they might not be a fit for you. So definitely take a look at that. I can also set up some time with you to walk you through the customer experience and what it would be like to work with Real Story Group, both from a research perspective and then to get one-on-one time with Tony and again the rest of our analysts as they can really help you making those important decisions around your MarTech stack. When it comes to our webinars, we do have another couple coming up here on the calendar. So in 2 weeks, we'll take a look at the DAM trends to look for in the coming month. And then at the end of the month, speaking of selecting marketing technology, we're going to be having a webinar on that very subject. So the right way to select marketing technology, walk you through the methodology that's really put forward as an organization for the past 20 years. So keep an eye out for that. Certainly be great to have you attend that. And I'll turn things back over to you, Tony, for the questions that have come in.
Yeah. So some good questions have come in. I invite you to type any more or just comments that you have. So Greg is asking, interested in your thoughts on deploying ML AI algorithms in the MarTech stack, guessing that you would see this best deployed at the core versus the edge. Which vendors are getting traction here? So it's really interesting. I mean, we are seeing some of this. I do tend to think it works better in the core where you're going to tend to have access to more data. So even at the layer of the intelligence hubs, before you even get to a CDP, for example, we're seeing a lot of pre-computed values being done there and then successfully pushed to a CDP. You should do it where the data is, and the richer the data, the better. So that tends to then suggest that you want to get to the core where you may have data lakes and other sizable data repository where it lives. There is a case for it to be done on the edge in terms of things that are real time with respect to behaviors and other things that aren't necessarily processed data, and can I do AI and ML against that? And the answer is, well, yes, I can, but it may not be quite as effective as when I have a full enterprise view of all that data. So I think the jury's still out on like a single place where I should do this, but we tend to think the core. So James is asking, when thinking about the tools used by business users, such as segmentation and journey management tools, should those tools be querying the same underlying database so that all the tools are leveraging the same single source of the truth? The answer there is, generally speaking, yes. If you're talking about segmentation and journey management, ideally you have a CDP where you have aggregated and unified all of your actionable customer data. It may not be a superset of all your customer data, but an actionable subset of data where I can build segments against. And so, ideally everyone's working off that single source of the truth. Otherwise, you run into the experience that we shared earlier, which was really where we were emerging out of the 2010s, where we were talking and behaving with people in different ways, in different channels, or across different points of a life cycle, in ways that are really intolerable, I think. And so if you're not all working off a unified set of the truth, then you run into, a lot of risks there. To be sure, we've learned working with a lot of organizations, particularly on CDP selections, that you can't be 100% purist about this. Nobody is. There's always going to be some localized data. There's always going to be some latency and other issues. Sometimes there's compliance issues. Sometimes there's specific things related, for example, to a call center where you have to treat things differently than you would necessarily an outbound email marketing campaign. So there are some exceptions to this rule, James, but generally speaking, yes, you want to all be working out of a single unified repository. Okay. Melissa is asking, where is Microsoft in all this? You mentioned Sitecore, Adobe, Salesforce, and Acquia, but you didn't say anything about Microsoft. Yeah, thank you, Melissa. That was an oversight. Microsoft has had a somewhat inconstant affection for MarTech in general over the years. I think they've dallied in and then pulled back and then sallied back in, and now they're a little bit more serious about it. It's all really revolving around the Dynamics group, so it's fundamentally based on sort of a CRM view of the world. They've built some newish marketing capabilities on top of that with respect to Dynamics marketing. They still don't really have the inbound piece quite worked out, but between those two now they have built a kind of a CDP layer based on unifying that data and really focused on reporting and analytics in particular. So that might be duplicative to certain other things that you have. So Microsoft is there. They're there largely in the mid-market. They still partner, with Adobe and others. And so, they have their niche, but we don't see them as dominant in this world, for example, as Salesforce, at least not yet. Great. So that brings us to the bottom of the half hour. Thanks again, everyone, for joining in. Look forward to, in your email inbox, for getting a copy of the deck. And if you'd like to engage further, feel free to contact us at either our website or this email coordinates, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So for Scott Dill, this is Tony Byrne signing off for now. Bye now.